Some nations just seem locked in this eternal cycle, right? A constant dance between prosperity and crisis, democracy and dictatorship, hope and despair. And Argentina, it's maybe the ultimate example of this. It's a country whose entire history swings back and forth just like a pendulum. It's always reinventing itself, but somehow it can't seem to escape its own patterns. So to really get a handle on the Argentina of today, we've got to go back. We have to trace the swings of this historical pendulum right from the very beginning. Okay, so the story of this land is ancient. I mean, way before anyone ever called it Argentina, human life was already taking root right here, way down on the southern tip of Patagonia. And these handprints you're seeing, they were left over 9,000 years ago. These people were the first in a really long line of inhabitants, from early hunter-gatherers all the way to sophisticated civilizations that were eventually conquered by the Inca Empire. This land has a memory that stretches back for thousands of years, which honestly just makes its modern history of constant, violent change feel even more dramatic. So yeah, that's really the central question for us today, isn't it? How did a place with such a deep, ancient history become a nation defined by this relentless swing of a political and economic pendulum? It's a fascinating puzzle, and to understand its present, we've got to look at the moments that first set that whole thing in motion. All right, so our story really kicks off in the 19th century. After finally breaking free from the Spanish Empire, the people of this huge territory faced a truly monumental task, deciding what kind of nation they were actually going to become. And this, right here, this is where the first great conflict emerges. So this massive territory, the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, was totally a Spanish creation. But when the May Revolution of 1810 kicked out the Spanish viceroy, the whole thing just shattered. And what came next wasn't some happy, immediate nationhood. Oh no, it was decades of brutal civil war. The core question was super simple, but the answer was anything but. Who should hold the power? And this right here breaks down the two opposing visions perfectly. On one side, you've got the Unitarians. Basically, think of them as the sophisticated elite from the port city, Buenos Aires. They believed all the power and all the money should flow from their European-style capital. But on the other side, you had the Federalists. These were the cowboys, the gauchos, and the powerful leaders from the huge interior provinces. And they fiercely resisted being controlled by the city. So, you see, this wasn't just some polite political debate. It was a fundamental clash of cultures. It was a battle for the very soul of the country. And believe me, it was a vicious battle. This quote from the time really just lays it bare. The big guy on the scene, the dominant figure of the era, was the Federalist governor Juan Manuel de Rosas. And he ruled through pure force. He had this paramilitary secret police, the Mazorca, and he used them to hunt down, torture, and just plain eliminate his Unitarian opponents. That first swing into the pendulum, it was absolutely drenched in blood. Okay, so after decades of brutal civil war, the pendulum finally swings the other way, towards stability and order. The late 19th century kicks off what a lot of people call Argentina's golden age. We're talking an era of just insane economic growth and modernization. But as always, this prosperity came with a price tag, and it created brand new tensions. What's so telling here is how the man and the map are connected. That's General Julio Argentino Roca. And he literally built his entire political career on what's shown on that map, the so-called conquest of the desert. This was a brutal military campaign that crushed indigenous resistance in Patagonia. It opened up vast new lands for farming and ranching, and that secured the resources that would fuel the nation's economic boom. This conquest made Roca a national hero and the undisputed political boss, kicking off an era where a conservative, landowning oligarchy ran everything. And at the exact same time, the country basically threw its doors open to the world. Millions of Europeans, mostly from Spain and Italy, poured in looking for new opportunities. I mean, they completely transformed Argentine society. They fueled its economic engine, and they created this vibrant new urban middle class and a politically aware working class. But these new Argentines pretty quickly started to demand a voice in how things were run. So how did this massive shift happen? Well, for decades, the ruling oligarchy just cheated. They faked the election results to stay in power. Simple as that. But this new middle class, led by a guy named Hipólito Yrigoyen, they weren't having it. They launched multiple revolts. The pressure just kept building and building until the old guard had a choice: pass real democratic reform or face a full-blown violent revolution. They chose reform. They passed a law that guaranteed a universal, secret vote for all men. And the moment they did, whoops, their time was up. The oligarchy was swept from power, and Irigoyen became the first truly democratically elected president. The pendulum had swung big time toward the people. But that democratic stability, yeah, it didn't last long. The Great Depression came along and just shattered Argentina's whole export-driven economy. And with it, political instability came roaring back. And in this climate of absolute chaos, the stage was set for the most transformative and controversial figure in the nation's entire history, Juan Perón. So, in 1930, the military steps in. They overthrow Irigoyen, and this kicks off what's known as the infamous decade. Democracy was basically a joke, a total sham. The country was run by this corrupt alliance of conservative politicians and military officers who just used fraud to stay in power. And it was against this backdrop of failure and deep frustration that a new force started to rise up from within the army itself. And his name was Juan Perón. He was this super charismatic colonel, and he was part of another military coup in 1943. He got the job of Secretary of Labor, and from there, he championed the cause of the industrial workers, the descamisados, or shirtless ones, the people who'd been ignored by every government before him. His popularity just exploded. It got so huge that when his rivals in the military had him arrested, massive protests forced them to release him. And in 1946, he was elected president in an absolute landslide. So here's the thing you have to understand about Perón. He is a figure of immense contradictions. On the one hand, his government empowered the working class like never before. He gave women the right to vote, thanks to the tireless work of his wife, the iconic Evita. He built a powerful welfare state. But, on the other hand, he also ruled with an iron fist. He jailed his opponents, he took control of the press, and pretty infamously, he provided a safe haven for fleeing Nazi war criminals after the war. He was a hero to millions, and he was a dictator to millions more. It's that complicated. So Perón creates this massive, powerful new political movement. But when the military overthrows him in 1955, that doesn't end Peronism, not even close. Instead, it just pushes the movement underground, and it sets off 2 decades of absolute political chaos, where the swings of that pendulum become more and more violent, and ultimately deadly. I mean, just look at this timeline. It is a dizzying cycle of pure instability. You can see the pattern clear as day. A military coup, followed by a weak civilian government, followed by an even more hardcore military coup. Peronism, the biggest political movement in the country, was outlawed, then it was legalized. Perón himself makes this triumphant return from exile in '73, only to die a year later, leaving this catastrophic power vacuum. The whole country was just tearing itself apart, caught in this street war between left-wing guerrillas and right-wing death squads. Then, in 1976, the military seized power one last time. Led by this man, General Jorge Rafael Videla, they promised to restore order. They called their new regime the National Reorganization Process. In reality, what they did was unleash a campaign of state-sponsored terror on a scale Argentina had never, ever seen before. And their primary weapon was disappearance. People, we're talking students, unionists, journalists, activists, literally anyone suspected of dissent, were just snatched from their homes or right off the street by security forces. They were taken to secret detention centers, they were tortured, and they were murdered. And by getting rid of the bodies, the regime could just deny everything. The victims simply ceased to exist. They became the disappeared. 30,000. That's the estimated number of people killed or disappeared during the 7 years of the dictatorship. 30,000 lives, just erased. It was the darkest, most brutal swing of the pendulum yet. Eventually, the dictatorship just collapsed under the weight of its own corruption and incompetence. But while democracy did return, Argentina's other great curse, that relentless economic instability, it stuck around, ensuring the pendulum would just keep on swinging. The final nail in the coffin for the military junta was this huge gamble that just backfired spectacularly. In 1982, they invaded the Falkland Islands, known as Las Malvinas in Argentina, trying to whip up some nationalist fever. Well, their swift and humiliating defeat by the United Kingdom completely discredited them. And in 1983, democracy was finally restored. But it's like the political pendulum was just replaced by an economic one. The 1990s brought these radical free market policies that created a quick boom, which was followed by a devastating bust. In December 2001, the economy completely imploded. It led to massive riots, and the country went through 5 presidents in just 2 weeks. I mean, the pattern of boom and bust was as baked in as ever. And, well, that brings us pretty much to today. Argentina has a solid democracy, but it's still a nation defined by polarization and constantly haunted by economic crisis. From the Unitarians and Federalists all the way to Peronists and anti-Peronists, its history has been one of these deep, seemingly impossible to reconcile divisions. So the question for Argentina, and the one we're going to leave you with, is this. After centuries of such violent swings, can that pendulum ever find its center? Can it finally come to rest?